In my family, memory is a liquid. It's poured into whatever shape is most convenient at the moment, and it solidifies into a story we are all expected to believe. For 2 years, their story was that I, Anika, was a thief. A jealous, spiteful daughter who tried to ruin them. I was a ghost they had exorcised from the family portrait, a name spoken only in whispers of shame. But ghosts have nothing but time. Time to watch, time to learn, time to remember the truth.
Tonight, I stand at the edge of a ballroom that smells of lilies and lies. My brother, Rohan, is across the room, bathed in golden light, celebrating his engagement to a shipping heiress. He looks like a prince. He is the sun around which my family has always revolved.
They have forgotten that a sun can cast a very long, very dark shadow. They believe their story is complete. The scandal has been erased. The triumphant sun is securing their dynasty. They are wrong. I am the shadow.
And I am here to remind them that the brightest lights can be swallowed whole by the darkness they create. They rewrote my history to save their perfect sun. But what if the story they told was a lie to cover up a much more dangerous truth?
What if, to save him, they had to destroy more than just their daughter?
In the house of Sharma, we were weavers of silk, but our true business was the weaving of illusions. Our name, Sharma Silks, was a hallmark of luxury, a legacy started by my grandfather, a man who understood the soul of a thread. I inherited his hands, his eye for quality. From the time I could walk, I was lost in the scent of dye and the rhythmic pulse of the looms. That was my world. My father inherited the company, but my mother was the high priestess of its most sacred creed, Izzat, honor, a pristine, unblemished reputation that was more valuable than any bolt of silk. And the living embodiment of that Izzat was my brother, Rohan.
Rohan was born for the spotlight. He had our father's dazzling smile and a charm that could disarm armies. He wore the Sharma name like a custom-made suit. He loved the applause, the magazine interviews, the way people's eyes lit up when he entered a room. The actual grueling work of running a textile empire, that was an inconvenience he delegated, mostly to me. While Rohan was the face, I was the foundation. In my small, cluttered office, surrounded by ledgers and design drafts, I was the one who made sure the empire stood. I managed the supply chains, balanced the books, and ensured the quality my grandfather would have demanded. I didn't crave the spotlight. I loved the work. I loved the quiet satisfaction of a perfect product. I believed with a profound naivete that my competence was my contribution, that my hard work would earn my place. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was the air we breathed. I remember once I spent months developing a new, more sustainable dyeing process. When I presented it to my father, he patted my head. Good work, Anika. Very practical. A week later, Rohan came home with a speeding ticket, his third, in his brand new convertible. My father laughed, clapped him on the back, and said, "Boys will be boys. You have your grandfather's spirit." My spirit, it seemed, was that of a useful but uninspired clerk. Rohan's mistakes were romanticized as signs of a bold personality. Mine were evidence of my dull, rigid nature. I lived in a gilded cage, its bars forged from my family's expectations. The love felt conditional, a prize I could see but never quite win. And yet, I stayed. I worked, because I loved the business more than I resented the injustice. I thought that one day, my father would finally see me. That he would see that Rohan was the beautiful, fragile sail, but I was the rudder. Then came the Oberoi contract, our one shot at becoming a global name, and I finally felt a flicker of hope. This would be it. This would be the project so big, so important, that my contribution could no longer be ignored. But how do you prove your worth when the people you love are determined not to see it? How do you build a legacy inside a house that has already decided you will have none? The Oberoi contract was my entire world. It was a chance to put Sharma Silks on a level we had only ever dreamed of. As expected, Rohan was the front man, charming the executives over lavish dinners.
I was the architect behind the curtain, working 18-hour days to make the impossible happen. The scale was immense, the quality standards were unforgiving, and I personally oversaw every thread. For months, it was perfect.
The first tremor of the earthquake was an invoice I didn't recognize. It was from a company called Mirage Textiles for a massive quantity of premium polyester, or art silk, as they politely called it. We were a house of pure silk.
We had no clients for synthetics. When I brought it to Rohan, he was distracted, scrolling on his phone. It's for a special order, Anika, a new market I'm testing. Don't worry about it. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach.
It didn't make sense, but to challenge Rohan was to challenge my father's judgment. It was to invite my mother's accusations of jealousy. So I did as I was told. I filed the invoice, but I also made a private copy, a small act of defiance. A secret I kept for myself.
2 months later, my world didn't just fall apart. It was detonated. A frantic, late-night call from a contact at the Oberoi Group. Their quality control had tested the first massive shipment. It wasn't silk. The entire delivery, worth a fortune, was a fraudulent synthetic. The air left my lungs. It was impossible. I had signed off on the pure silk myself. I spent the next 48 hours in a fever dream of paranoia, tearing through our servers, our financials, every document I could get my hands on. And then I found it. Not just a second set of books, but something far worse. Fragmented email chains on a barely used server, not with a supplier, but with a name I recognized from the city's criminal underbelly, a notorious loan shark. Rohan wasn't just skimming profit. He was in terrifying debt. He had gotten in over his head, funding his lavish lifestyle with money from dangerous people. The polyester swap wasn't for a side project. It was a desperate, idiotic scheme to raise cash to pay them off. He was using the Oberoi contract to save his own skin, and in the process, he was setting our entire family legacy on fire. When I confronted him, his charm evaporated. This wasn't the arrogant prince I knew. This was a cornered, terrified man. "You don't understand, Anika," he stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "These people, they don't care about the business. They'll ruin us. They'll hurt us." But before I could even process his words, he was gone, running to our parents. By the time I walked into my father's study, the narrative had already been set. But it wasn't the one I expected.
Rohan was there, sobbing, but my father's face wasn't one of disappointment. It was pale with stark terror. My mother was gripping his arm, her knuckles white. Rohan told them a twisted version of the truth, that he'd made a mistake, that he'd been threatened, and that I had discovered it and was planning to expose him, which would bring the loan sharks down on all of us. He painted me not as a thief, but as a liability, a righteous crusader whose quest for truth would get them all killed. "She has to go away, Papa," he begged. "If they think she knows, they'll come for her. They'll come for all of us." I looked at my father, expecting fury, but all I saw was fear. He looked at me, and it felt like he was looking straight through me. The decision had been made. To protect the family, to make this problem vanish, the witness had to vanish too. They weren't just protecting Rohan's reputation anymore. They were trying to outrun a predator. The ultimatum was brutal and swift. I would sign a confession admitting to fraud and embezzlement. I would take the fall for the Oberoi disaster, creating a neat, tidy story that would explain the company's sudden financial trouble. In return, they wouldn't just avoid the police. They would give me a severance, and I would disappear. For my own safety, they said. My father slid the papers across his mahogany desk. His hand was trembling.
"Anika," he said, his voice a choked whisper, "as of this moment, you are no longer my daughter." The words were an execution, but his eyes held a desperate, terrified plea. It was the look of a man sacrificing a pawn to save his king. Numb, broken, and utterly alone, I signed my name. I was officially a criminal, a traitor, an exile.
As I walked out of that house for the last time, the only question burning in my mind was not why they had betrayed me, but what they were so terrified of. Was my father protecting his perfect son, or was he, in the cruelest way imaginable, trying to save my life?
The first year was a free fall into nothingness. I lived in a gray, anonymous apartment on the other side of the city, working a data entry job that required none of my mind and all of my silence. The severance they gave me felt like blood money.
I was a ghost, haunted by the memory of my father's terrified eyes. The anger was a constant, burning fever, but underneath it was a cold, gnawing confusion. The story didn't make sense.
The scale of the cover-up felt bigger than just protecting Rohan's reputation.
The fog began to clear on a rainy Tuesday. I was reconciling accounts at my job when I found a tiny discrepancy, a rounding error hidden in a sea of numbers. The quiet satisfaction of finding it, of making it balance, was like a key turning in a long rusted lock. I remembered who I was. I was an architect of systems. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that my family's story was an unbalanced ledger.
My revenge would not be a storm. It would be an audit, a cold, meticulous excavation of the truth.
I started with my old work logins. My access had been revoked, of course, but they were sloppy. In their panic, they had forgotten about the deep archive server, a digital graveyard of old projects. My admin credentials still worked there. For weeks, I spent my nights sifting through fragmented data. I found what I was looking for, the digital footprints of Rohan's panic. Deleted emails to the loan shark, Kedar, discussing repayment terms and collateral.
The collateral he had offered, the entire Oberoi shipment. Rohan hadn't just risked the company's reputation, he'd gambled the entire business against a criminal's loan. This was why my father was so afraid.
Sharma Silks was already owned by someone else. Next, I needed a human source. I remembered Mr. Ansari, our head dye master, a purist who my grandfather had called a silk whisperer. Rohan had fired him just before the scandal broke. Finding him took a month. He was working at a small fabric shop, his genius wasted. When I sat down with him in his tiny apartment and told him everything, his kind eyes hardened with a familiar pain. He hadn't just been fired for refusing to dye the polyester.
Rohan had brought Kedar, the loan shark, with him. Mr. Ansari told me the man had stood silently in the corner of the dye lab, his presence a clear and terrifying threat. Mr. Ansari wasn't just fired, he was intimidated into silence. He gave me a sworn affidavit, his hand shaking as he wrote.
The final piece of my strategy fell into place, not through investigation, but through the society pages. A lavish announcement. Textile Prince Rohan Sharma to wed shipping heiress Priya Kapoor. My first instinct was a bitter laugh. Of course.
A marriage to the daughter of K.S. Kapoor, a ruthless, self-made billionaire, would be the ultimate solution to all their problems. The Kapoor fortune would be the shield against Kedar, the ultimate restoration of their precious Izzat. But as I read about Mr. Kapoor, a new plan began to form. He was described as a man with an obsession for integrity and a legendary, almost pathologically thorough approach to due diligence. A public accusation from me would be messy. It would be dismissed as the ravings of a disgraced daughter. It could even put me on Kedar's radar. I couldn't fight my family and a criminal syndicate. But K.S. Kapoor could. My plan shifted. I wouldn't be the executioner. I would be the anonymous source.
I would simply place the truth in the hands of the one man in the city with the resources and the motivation to burn my family's empire to the ground. 2 weeks before the engagement party, I compiled a package. It was simple, clean, and devastating. It contained copies of the Mirage Textiles invoices, the shipping discrepancies for the Oberoi order, and a single printed page with the name Kedar and his known business affiliations. No commentary, no accusations, just the facts. I sent it anonymously to Mr. Kapoor's private office, a single matchstick dropped into a tinderbox. Now all I could do was wait. I had armed a Titan, but I had no idea if he would go to war. Would he protect his daughter's fiancé to avoid a scandal, or would he protect his own empire from the rot he was about to marry into? Everything hinged on the character of a man I had never met. The engagement party would be my answer. The Grand Imperial Ballroom was a universe of its own, shimmering with chandeliers and suffocating self-importance. I wore a simple midnight blue sari, one of my grandfather's forgotten designs I had found in a trunk. It was my armor, a silent statement that I was the legacy, not them. I felt less like a guest and more like a ghost observing her own wake.
My goal was not to make a scene, but to witness one.
My parents saw me almost immediately. Their reaction was not anger, but sheer panic. My mother's glass of champagne trembled in her hand. My father went pale, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for a threat. "Anika," my father hissed, rushing to my side. "What are you doing? You can't be here. It isn't safe." "I'm safer here than I ever was with you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I looked past him, scanning the crowd until I found him. Mr. K.S.
Kapoor. He was a statue of quiet intensity, watching my family's panicked reaction with cold, analytical eyes. In that moment, I knew he had received the package. The fuse was lit. The evening progressed like a slow-motion train wreck. Rohan, oblivious, was playing the part of the charming prince, while my parents circled the room like nervous sheepdogs, trying to keep him away from the Kapoors.
The tension was a high-frequency hum that only I seemed to hear. Then I saw it. Mr.
Kapoor, with a polite but firm hand, guided Rohan toward a private study off the main ballroom. Priya, his daughter, watched them go, her beautiful face a mask of controlled neutrality. 20 minutes later, the music softened for the celebratory speeches. Rohan's best man was just raising his glass when the doors to the study opened. Mr. Kapoor walked out alone. He moved with a chilling calm, bypassing his table and walking directly to the stage. He took the microphone from the stunned best man. The room fell into a cathedral-like silence. He didn't shout. His voice was measured, devoid of emotion, which made it all the more brutal. "My apologies for the interruption," he began, his gaze sweeping over the powerful guests. "I am sorry to announce that there has been a significant and frankly insurmountable divergence in our family's core values. The business of family, like any business, requires a foundation of integrity. That foundation, I have discovered, is absent." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Therefore, the engagement between my daughter, Priya, and Mr. Rohan Sharma is hereby terminated." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. He had not shared a single detail. He didn't need to. His quiet, public withdrawal was a verdict more damning than any accusation I could have ever made. He was K.S. Kapoor. His word was gospel. In that moment, Sharma Silks was turned to ash. Priya stood up. With a grace that was terrifying to behold, she walked to the stage. She did not look at Rohan, who had stumbled out of the study looking like a man who had seen a ghost. She stripped the colossal diamond from her finger, placed it on the podium, and turned to her father. Without a word, the entire Kapoor contingent, a full third of the room's power and influence,
began to file out in a silent, orderly procession. It was not a chaotic exit, it was a shunning. I watched as my family stood marooned on a suddenly empty island of shame. My mother was weeping silently. My father looked at the exit, then at me across the room. His face was a canvas of defeat, and for the first time, a flicker of understanding. He finally saw the real architect of his ruin. As I turned to leave, my mother lunged forward and grabbed my arm. Her grip was like iron. "Anika," she whispered, her voice ragged. She pressed a small, cold key into my palm. "Your grandfather's first workshop, on the old mill road. He left it for you. The papers are in the desk." Her eyes were wild. "He always said you were the only one with his soul. He knew." She released me and stumbled back to my father's side. I stood there, the key, a brand in my hand. My revenge was complete. My family was ruined. But my mother's final act had just revealed a secret I never knew existed, a hidden history beneath the one they had tried to write. I had come for vengeance, but I had found a mystery. What had my grandfather known? It's been 2 years since that night. The fallout was a quiet, creeping poison. Mr. Kapoor's public denouncement was a death sentence. Without his family's financial shield, the loan shark, Kedar, came to collect. My father sold everything, the company, the villa, my mother's jewelry, in a desperate fire sale to pay off the debt and keep Rohan from vanishing into the back of a car. The great Sharma Silks was no more. My parents now live in a small, rented apartment, the ghost of their Izzat, their only companion. Rohan is gone. No one knows where. He simply ceased to exist in the city that once adored him. The day after the party, I drove to the old mill road. The workshop was just as I remembered from childhood, a small, forgotten brick building smelling of dust and dried wood. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, beneath a thick layer of dust, was my grandfather's world, bolts of his original, experimental weaves, his handwritten logbooks filled with notes on dyes and patterns. And in the drawer of his old wooden desk, a thick envelope with my name on it. Inside were the deed to the workshop and a letter. In his elegant script, he told me he had seen the same fire in me that he had in himself, and the same reckless ambition in Rohan that worried him. He had left the workshop to me in his will, a secret legacy, a safety net he hoped I'd never need. My father had hidden it. That was the final, quietest betrayal of all. But holding the letter, it felt less like a wound and more like a map. I didn't rebuild the empire. I had no desire to. Instead, I reopened the small workshop, calling it Anika's Weavers. I found Mr. Ansari and made him my partner. We don't chase massive contracts. We create bespoke textiles for designers who value craftsmanship. We honor the soul of the thread. My work is small, it is honest, and it is entirely mine. I thought triumph would feel loud. I had imagined applause, apologies, vindication. But my peace came in the quiet hum of a single loom, in the satisfaction of creating something true. My mother came to the workshop once. She didn't speak. She just stood by the door for a long time, watching me work. She didn't apologize, and I didn't ask her to. Some ledgers can never be balanced. But as she left, I felt the faintest shift in the air. Not forgiveness, but an acknowledgement. A silent admission that the story was finally, truly over. The best revenge, I've learned, is not about settling scores. It's not about burning down someone else's house. It's about having the courage to build your own, on your own terms, and finding the quiet strength to live inside it. Sometimes your voice is stolen from you. If you've ever had to fight to get it back, let me know by hitting that like button. And for more stories about rewriting your own narrative, make sure you subscribe.
Tell me in the comments, what does it mean to you to create your own legacy?